Welcome to the second section of the Francestown Heritage Museum virtual tour. Part of the Francestown Heritage Museum's purpose is to show folks what life was like for our early ancestors and present examples of the tools, implements, and other goods that they used to assist them in their survival. We hope people visiting the museum or viewing this virtual tour will gain a better understanding of their heritage and an appreciation of the hardships faced by their ancestors. Also, how their hard labor and determination helped lay the foundation for our lives today. When our ancestors were first settling Francestown, the priorities were shelter and food, but neither was possible without some degree of commerce. It was not necessarily business as we think of it today, as much of it took place was by bartering. One of the first items of commerce was the need for building sawmills. They needed lumber to build their homes and barns for livestock. It was also necessary for everything from building wagons to caskets. Trees as a whole led a precarious existence back then, as they were cut down to supply sawmills, to provide firewood, and to clear land for crops. Their bark was stripped to tan leather, and their wood burned to make ashes with which to produce potash, which was one of our first cash-producing products. The museum has several different types of saws, or at least the blades, used in the forest and in sawmills. Our first commerce exhibit is a two-man saw. For felling trees, the preferred tool was this and/or an axe. A two-man saw was designed for use by loggers and cut in both directions. Using a two-man saw involved a logger standing at each end. Together, they would alternate the pulling through the wood back and forth. Until a proper water-powered sawmill could be built, our ancestors relied on crude pit sawmills. The log to be cut was positioned on a wooden framework over a pit, and a long two-handled saw was moved up and down by two men, one standing above the timber and the other below in the pit. The upper sawyer was called the top man. He followed the marked line to make a straight plank, and the underman pushed the pit saw upward. This method was soon replaced by water-powered sawmills. The saw blade has spaces at each end to attach the blade to the sawmill machinery. More advanced sawmills came later and utilized large circular blades rather than the up-and-down saw blade. Like today, our ancestors needed things built and repaired for them. They could do much themselves, but some things just had to be done by a skilled craftsman. Thus, the business of the Wheelwright was born, and this was an important bit of commerce back in the day. The Wheelwright became somewhat of a jack of all trades, a skilled carpenter and joiner, furniture maker, hedge carpenter, servicing farming needs such as wheelbarrows, a cooper and a millwright, constructing and repairing mill wheels and grinding mechanisms for the local mills. They often made children's toys and very often acted as the village undertaker, coffin making an obvious related skill. The Heritage Museum has a number of exhibits featuring some of those tools. A shave or shaving horse was a common tool for wheelwrights and is a combination of vise and workbench used for woodworking. Typical usage of the shaving horse was to create a round profile along a square piece, such as for a wheel spoke or chair leg. Common tools used on the shaving horse were spoke shaves and draw knives. The wheelwright also made and repaired wagon, cart, and similar items. While our ancestors never suffered a flat tire, they did occasionally break a wheel, which the wheelwright would need to repair. How do you jack up a wagon? Why, with a wagon jack, of course. The wheelwright might have a replacement wheel arc already made up in his shop, as fitting a new arc in a wheel was a long and laborious task. Another task that was both necessary and income-producing was the winter ice harvest. The blocks of ice were not only used locally for refrigeration purposes, but large quantities were sold and shipped to Boston and elsewhere. Harvesting of ice consisted of cutting large blocks of ice from the pond. The steps involved ice saws to cut the pond into blocks, ice chisels. This photo shows that workers did not necessarily need to cut individual ice blocks, but could score out individual ice blocks using a horse and an ice plow. The lines scored in the ice by the ice plow are clearly visible in the photo. It was into these lines that a man with a heavy ice chisel would jam the tool between two ice blocks and pop them apart. Back at the ice house, handling cold blocks of slippery ice was made much easier with the use of ice tongs. In our ancestors' time, products were stored and shipped mainly in wooden crates and barrels. Barrel making was a skill left to the commercial coopers. The shave horse, previously discussed, was a favorite tool of the coopers who would shave the barrel staves on them. Many of the coopers' tools are found in the museum exhibits for the wheelwright and the ironmonger or blacksmith. One specialty tool of the coopers was a barrel header. The barrel header was developed to allow inserting the top once the barrel was complete. The metal hooks attached to the bottom of the barrel. The screw on the top was tightened against the barrel top to press the top into the groove around the top of the barrel to seal the barrel tight. Suffice it to say that having all of these wood barrels necessitated having some means to handle them in an efficient manner. Barrel carts were common. Once filled, these barrels were often quite heavy, and a means to lift them was necessary. Several types of barrel lifters were developed. As commerce continued to grow and products were produced for sale and profit, some began to be shipped to Boston and on back to England. This trade necessitated a means to measure the contents of the barrel, especially those going abroad, where excise agents would be checking the contents. Specialty tools were developed for measuring the barrels, and the coopers had to also ensure that the barrels they made conformed to requirements. The barrel or cask was laid on its side, and cross calipers extended to determine the diameter of the barrel at the widest and narrowest point. The long caliper was used to measure the length, and thus the capacity of the barrel could be determined from these and other measurements. Some calipers had built-in factors that accounted for the thickness of the staves. Once agriculture was firmly established, products beyond the immediate needs of the citizens could be made and sold. Non-farm families relied on this in order to survive, as they were engaged in areas that did not produce food. Those with dairy cows could use the excess to make cheese with commercial value. A cheese press was utilized to make these cheese products. The cheese press works by pressing curds from the milk of your cows or goats. The press generates approximately 50 pounds of pressure. This force keeps the curds pressed together and is known as knitting. The Heritage Museum exhibits include those used to produce other food products such as a sausage stuffer, lard press, egg and milk delivery containers, and abattoir equipment. We also offer exhibits featuring a selection of tools used by our ancestors that appear quaint by today's standards. Books became more common and needed to be bound. The Pridmore Press was designed for the job. This heavy steel press allowed the pages and covers of a book to be pressed together and held in place while the binding was glued and/or stitched. While initially a farm town, Francestown soon grew with the building of water-powered mills and our numerous rivers. Products came from a local oil mill, grist mill, shingle mill, sawmills, potash manufacturing, and tanneries. The coming of the Second New Hampshire Turnpike made us a primary stop on the stage route from Boston to Montreal, and retail and service businesses prospered with several banks, stores, hotels, and liveries. The later discovery of soapstone and that quarry and mill led to Francestown's reputation as the producer of the finest soapstone products available. The Francestown Academy was a renowned educational institution that graduated future noble statesmen. An example of a local merchant was the Francestown General Store. This sign from the store dates back to one of the longest-running family owners. Israel Vadney and his family operated this business for some 40 years, and a descendant still resides in Francestown today. Until recently, this store was the second oldest continuously operating store in the United States. This has been a snapshot of the Heritage Museum's exhibits related to the commercial business of our ancestors in Francestown. There are over 100 such commerce exhibits, so please do stop by. There's no admission charge, and you may be surprised at how enterprising the folks of the 17 and 1800s really were. We invite you to view the remaining 4 virtual tour segments that deal with the agriculture of the time, domestic life, firefighting, and transportation. Thank you for watching this segment of the virtual tour of the Francestown Heritage Museum. We look forward to having you visit us in the coming year.